What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds for 123 days now, going up to 365. And in today's video, we're going to be going through rapid prototyping, basically turning an idea into a demo within minutes. And this is going to be my approach to how I am doing this with speed and also iterating on it as well. Because I think rapid prototype or building prototypes rapidly and then iterating on that is key to innovation and also building new things as well. So we're going to be going through the inflows, basically capturing the raw ideas, and through these raw ideas then we're going to process them, which is the core loop, and from the core loop we're then going to move into the outflows, basically what comes out of this system that we're ultimately building, and as well as the core principles that we also need to take into consideration as well. And then we're going to have a final thought, just a final thought that I share as well. So if we take a look at the inflows, basically capturing raw ideas, we can see that this comes from a variety of different sources. This can come from personal problems, basically the different problems that you and I may also share. So this can be anything, and also understanding client pain points. This can also come as a result of client pain points where people are facing, pain and they need solving. Because I think, one of the most important things is ultimately being a problem solver and just solving problems for other people and also creating value through that. And that also means identifying market gaps as well. So this can come from identifying market gaps within your specific industry or any industry that you may see. And this comes from you just solely understanding that, these are the raw ideas that I have for this specific market gap, and this is how I am going to be, trying to build something and getting, market data from that. And from that data, it's going to tell me whether I should continue or not. Because it's one thing just building blind without capturing raw ideas and not fully understanding, what it is that you're trying to build and what problem you're trying to solve. And if there's anything, the main thing is to understand the problem and the scope of the problem that you're trying to solve. Because if you don't understand that and you build blind, then you're ultimately not gonna you're not gonna understand where the value is gonna be within what you're building. And this also means that it comes with rules, which means that you need to capture everything and filter later. You need to capture all the different ideas because you never know what will stick and what will work. You'll only find that out from prototyping and testing out the market. You can build whatever you want to build and not really understand whether it's valuable or not. And I've seen this countless of times where people think they're building things, they're like super valuable, but not taking the approach of asking people that, hey, are you actively having this pain point? Are you having this problem? Because creating value, in my opinion, comes as a result of solving other people's problems. And if you don't understand what the core problems are in terms of what the needs are, the 2 to 3 things that they need solving, and then building around that, then you're not going to understand how to basically approach this. So this means you basically capture everything, and through capturing everything you're making sure that you're just capturing everything and finding out, so that when you move to the process, the core loop, you ultimately understand what are the things that you need to delete, and then from there also refine. And this means that you're filtering later, so you're not just building and then filtering straight away, because you're not understanding what is exactly gonna you work into the future. And this is your process of rapidly prototyping, of saying, hey, I have this idea, here are the different things that encompass this idea. Let me just build it now and just rapidly build it out and ultimately capture everything, because you're not going to understand what's going to stick and what's also not going to work as well. So that's where the process that we're going to get into now, the core loop, is ultimately going to help you identify and see the different processes and steps that ultimately go into this. But that also means that you use different tools in order to do this, basically capturing it in Notion, Apple Notes, or whiteboards, just making sure that you're exhausting all the different ideas from the specific prototype that you want to build for the solution. And this doesn't necessarily have to be down to systems, it can be also to building stuff as well. If you're understanding of I need to I want to build this specific thing, why don't you just take the approach of capturing everything and then understanding that you're going to filter data, because you're not going to understand what's going to work now unless you actively get those data points. And how do you get those data points? You ultimately need to find out what problems they are and how you can create a solution that is valuable to those specific problems. And that means we can then move on to the next stage, which is the process, which is the core loop, where we basically take the step-by-step approach, where we understand that number one, we reduce, basically we break the idea down into small testable units. So what are the things that we can actively test from the different ideas that we've formulated and captured everything from? And number two, which is build, basically saying, hey, what are the existing modules slash templates, databases, automations that we can ultimately use in order to build this prototype rapidly, so that we can find out what works a lot later down the line. And this also means that we can then move on to the third step, which is basically connect, where it's only the essentials that are ultimately built that show the value that we want to present. Understanding that, you're not going to build every single thing from the initial get-go, because 2 to 3 things may be super valuable from the thing that you built, and you need to be able to understand from your ideas how you then breaking it down and then using different existing modules slash templates to ultimately test the market and understand what works and what actively or what actually is valuable. And then from there, connecting, only showing the essentials or focusing on what's essential in order to show the value that you're providing. And also understanding that from this, then you can move on to the fourth step, which is ship, where you basically deploy, test, and gather feedback. From this, you're basically able to deploy your solution that you think is right. And from there, you basically get the market data that I spoke about in the beginning, basically the different data points that ultimately allows you to test, refine, and then gather feedback as well, because you're not going to know what is going to work in terms of what it is that you're rapidly prototyping. Your main idea right now, or your main focus right now when you're rapidly prototyping, is to get something that works and you can test it straight away, so that if you fail, you're failing fast and you're failing cheaply as well. You don't want to go the route of building this most complex thing and pouring insane amounts of money and time and effort without understanding, are you truly hitting at the core of the problem that you're trying to solve? Do people even have that problem? Because it's one thing to build a solution, but it's another thing to go through the process of testing and building somewhat of an MVP. And through that MVP, you're then able to ship, find out this is what you're building, and finding out as well as the different packaging methods. Is the way that you're packaging it working or not? Because you don't want to spend so much time and effort deploying it, and yes, it may be valuable, but you find out that the way that you were packaging and selling it as well was not the way that it needed to be sold. But you could have found out that data by simply having to take the approach of just testing it out early on, so that you can find out where those data points are, and from those data points then you're able to then build into the future this solution that you're then able to gather. And that also comes from feedback, and this comes from the different feedback loops that you ultimately need to run and also understand as well. And I made countless of videos in terms of understanding the different feedback loops and how to basically build a system somewhat of different feedback loops. And you can also run this through your advisory board. And through this advisory board, I've also spoken about it in a previous video, where you basically gather the strategic advisory board of 2 to 3 people, or even 10, that you have, and you run ideas through. And from running those ideas through, they help you refine and also iterate on your specific product that you're working, so that you're failing fast and failing cheaply as well. But this process means that you're doing this in loops. So you're basically going from idea stage, where you're basically capturing everything and just jotting every single thing down, and then you reduce to its core components. So understanding what the core components are, like what are the 2 to 3 things that you need to be focusing on, that you believe is going to be encompassing everything else, so that you can build you can build the other elements around it. And then you ultimately move from that reducing stage to then building, where you actively just build the solution. And then from there, you just basically connect, where you only show the essentials, what actively shows or produces value. And then from there you ship, you get away straight to then showing your product and showing the loops that ultimately encompass it as well, and showing this is what I'm building and this is what we're actively solving for as well. But that means we then also need to understand the outflows. So what comes as a result out of this system? We basically build an MVP, a quick MVP, and we ask the binary question, or this binary question is then asked, does it solve a pain point? Which I've been hammering on throughout this video, of focusing on, are you actively identifying, a problem worth solving, and are you solving that problem through this MVP? And if so, how are you gathering the data? Are you actively gathering the data that shows you that this is a problem worth solving, not just now but into the future as well? And how can you actively create value from that? And then running feedback as well, because feedback feeds back into the inflow. So if you're gathering feedback, you can then run this loop again, where you then focusing on the inflows of saying, hey, we've built somewhat of this product, let's run it back to the inflows and keep this loop running, where we basically source the different pain points. We understand the pain points a lot deeper now that we've built a solution that ultimately tests it. We understand that, hey, our solution only covered 20% of the problem. There's still so much more, and we're gonna gather so much more data just from asking those questions and running those loops back and saying, hey, we found out that we're only solving 20% of the problem. So now we capture everything again. We basically start to then understand that we're gonna filter later in terms of the things that we've captured from running this loop, and then from there we jot everything down, and then we run the process again through the core loop again, where we basically break down the idea again, and then we reduce, basically saying, hey, we're going to build the existing modules / templates through databases and automations, and then we're going to connect, and then from there we're going to see only what's essential to show value, and then from there we're going to ship, and then deploy, and then test, and then gather feedback from that, and then we're going to run the loop again. And that ultimately means that we're just constantly running this loop, where we're then rapidly iterating and making sure that what we're building is valuable, not only just today but also into the future, so that we're rapidly prototyping. Because my personal opinion is, you're not going to know what's going to work if you keep hesitating. If you don't test out the market and find out what is actively working and what's not, then you're not going to fail fast and fail cheaply as well. You're going to fail expensive. And one of the things that I like to think about this is in rocket terms. Like, you can see, for example, you see these big rocket companies that ultimately take years and years and years in order to build the perfect rocket that is able to go to space or even go to Mars, and they take, say, 4 years to build that, and everything has to be perfect, everything has to be super dialed in, because they can't fail. If they do fail, it's going to take so much longer simply to just roll out and go out there and and launch again. So through that, understanding that loop of saying, hey, if it takes this long for them to be able to build a rocket that ultimately goes into space, what is the other approach? And this approach is basically rapidly iterating. And how do we rapidly iterate? We do the SpaceX route, where we basically just build a bunch of prototypes as quickly and as cheaply as possible. If they fail, they fail, but as long as we're gathering data, and gathering this data, we have this then process where we have this loop of inflows, process, and then outflows, where we're basically understanding that this loop feeds into each other constantly, and this ultimately encompasses the different principles that we then take from this. And this is that speed is better than polish, focusing on speed, rapidly iterating, because from there we're quicker to get data points, we're quicker to identify what's working and what's not working, and through this we're then able to leverage existing tools. So we're basically able to just build cheaply and just not spend too much by not fully understanding what works and what doesn't work. And then from there we're then able to think in systems. So how do we think in different processes, in different flows, and not just in apps, and as well as short feedback loops compound. If we're then able to shorten the feedback loops that we're then able to get, then we can build a lot quicker and fail a lot faster, which ultimately gets us to the point where we feel confident enough to build out the solution full on solution. Then from there, we can then build out and take the time to build out the full solution. And understanding that this rapidly iterating prototype cycle never truly ends. It's just how can we constantly refine it. And this also means that we're just taking the approach of understanding that the faster you ship, the faster you learn. The rapid prototypes compound advantage. If you're being lean and just focusing on how can we fail fast and how can we fail cheaply in the manner that we can just fail as much as possible and make sure that we're just pushing the needle forward in each and every single thing that we're doing. For example, like with these daily videos, not each day is going to be super perfect. Some days are going to be super tough in terms of recording and things of that nature, but ultimately rapid iteration in terms of the different inflows, basically the ideas that I have for the different videos, and then process loops. So how am I reducing this and how am I then moving it through this loop of saying, hey, this is the idea that I have had and this is how I'm reducing it into its core components, and from this I'm building. So basically using existing tools and templates in order to build this, and then connecting, basically understanding that I'm only going to focus on what's essential to show. Basically, how can I show value within each and every single video, and then shipping, basically producing this video and running this loop back each and every single video, so that I'm rapidly iterating and just making videos each and every single day, but each video is getting sharper and sharper in terms of understanding and also iteration as well. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my newsletter that I recently just rolled out, and also make sure to check out my X, LinkedIn, Instagram if you want to connect. So yeah, it's been Fari, and I will see you guys in the next video.